The Vietnamese Football Federation goes out of its way to pause leagues just for under 20 tournaments. And yet somehow, they're still not as shambolic as the current state of the US Soccer Federation. So I know I'm a little late to the party, but I just wanted to wait for the investigation to be done. Back during the World Cup, the US reached the last 16 where they were eliminated by the Netherlands. Throughout the competition though, there was always skepticism about why one of our most talented players, Reyna, wasn't playing. The young player was left on the bench against Wales, and head coach Greg Berhalter justified the decision by saying it was to avoid injury. However, Reyna dismissed that claim, stating he felt good and felt ready to go. More questions were asked when in the next fixture, again, Reyna didn't play that much, despite our attack lacking. Instead, he only got 7 minutes off the bench. This is when things start to leak out. Because during a Twitter space, former US striker Eric Wijnaldum made some comments about a, quote, massive controversy within the team. He mentioned while talking with Claudio Reyna, Gio's dad, that Gio was fit and Berhalter did lie to the media about the injury. A few days later, during another interview, Wijnaldum added Greg not only asked Gio to go along with the notion that an injury kept them out against Wales, he had expected the player to follow suit. Next was a crucial match against the Iranians, who weren't exactly in the right headspaces at the time, and once again, Reyna didn't play. In this case though, people didn't really talk about that as much just because the US were now going on to the next round, so everyone was talking about that more. Then in the last 16, after initially being on the bench, Reyna came on immediately in the second half. The US were down 2-0 at this point, and he wasn't much of a threat, as was the rest of the attack due to Berhalter's ineptitude in tactics. Again, not that much discussion about Reyna not starting because he at least played 45 minutes, and people were more focused on Greg Berhalter's sacking. But then just days after the World Cup, everything turned into a complete show. It all started when Greg Berhalter at some leadership conference decided to talk about a certain player without ever mentioning their name. He said there was one player who clearly wasn't meeting expectations on and off the field, adding that he and his staff spent hours trying to figure out what to do with said player. At first, they were ready to book the player a plane ticket home, but if you know anything about the Anelka situation in 2010, you'll know that's a horrible idea. So instead, Berhalter had a conversation with the player about his behavior, and at the end of all of this, said player was told to thoroughly apologize to the entire squad for his lack of effort. Despite no name ever being mentioned, it was pretty clear Greg was talking about Reyna. An Athletic article supported that idea with anonymous sources within the camp. To go into further detail, it was said that on November 17th, Reyna lacked intensity in a scrimmage against a Qatari club. Then after a post-Wales training session, Reyna once again showed a lack of effort, which then prompted some veteran players to speak with him. Regarding the apology itself, according to sources, Reyna stood up before a video session and apologized for his attitude in front of everyone. After the expressions of regret, several players on the team spoke up to hold Reyna accountable for his actions, forgave him, and the issues between both parties ended there. Which now had confused many, because why did Greg Berhalter bring this back up after the World Cup? It had already been resolved in private, and now all of a sudden it was being brought out into the public. Gio then confirmed it himself on Instagram a day after the Berhalter quote came out. And this is where we get the reasoning behind why exactly Reyna was feeling this way during the entire World Cup. Reyna in his post talked about how before the tournament, Greg Berhalter had actually told him he'd have a very limited role. That's right folks, our clueless PE teacher told one of our most talented players he wouldn't be playing that much. I know some people will say it was because Reyna was coming back from injury and he still wasn't 100%, but that's bullshit because A, he confirmed it himself, and also B, he was playing a decent amount of minutes at Dortmund even before the tournament. That being said, the way Reyna initially reacted to the news still isn't acceptable. But in no circumstance, unless actually injured, should a coach be discouraging one of his players before the tournament even begins. Now in the post as well, Reyna again acknowledges that his emotions had gotten the best of him and said he apologized. But it's just frustrating reading this knowing he'd already dealt with this in private. The other most important part of Reyna's Instagram post though was how he mentioned Berhalter had always said issues that arise with the team will stay in-house so they can focus on team unity and progress. And obviously, as you can see, Berhalter flat out f***ing lied about that. But if you thought it ended there, You're very mistaken. However, before we get to that, we need further context on the Reyna and Berhalter families. Greg Berhalter and Gio's dad Claudio Reyna grew up together playing football in the early 80s. They also played together in high school. Greg's wife Rosalind Berhalter and Gio's mother Danielle Reyna were super close friends and played together at UNC Chapel Hill. Off topic, I never studied there, but I am now an honorary student just because I rushed Franklin once. Anyways though, while Claudio would play football at the University of Virginia, Greg would play his at UNC. But it wouldn't be the end of their relationship because Greg and Claudio would eventually play together once again in the national team. However, it was at UNC where Greg would meet his future wife, Rosalind. So basically, since the very beginning, the Reynas and the Berhalters have been very tight-knit. They've not only seen themselves grow up together, but also their children, including Gio. Now, back to the show. On January 3rd, the USMNT came out with a statement regarding allegations against Greg Berhalter. Around the same exact time, Greg Berhalter released a statement regarding said allegations, where he said, quote, "An individual contacted US Soccer saying they had information about him that would take him down, in an apparent effort to leverage something very personal from long ago to bring about the end of his relationship with US Soccer." This then prompted Greg to tell the story of what happened. In 1991, Greg Berhalter was an 18-year-old college student attending the University of North Carolina. At the time, Greg and Rosalind had been dating for 4 months when an incident occurred. In Greg's words, the two were at a bar and got into a pretty heated argument. It continued outside, got physical, and Greg ended up kicking Rosalind's legs. Greg regretted it from the very moment it happened and told his family and friends because he wanted to take full responsibility. He also sought out counseling to improve himself and never let anything like this happen again. Eventually, the two made up 7 months later, and according to the pair, there's not been an incident since. It should be mentioned that Berhalter's contract had just expired with the national team, but he was still a candidate to become coach again. So whoever was trying to use his past against him had to be someone who didn't want to see him get the job. The question is, how did they get their hands on such a personal story? Surely it had to be someone close with Rosalind or Greg Berhalter. Indeed they were. It was Gio's mother, Danielle Reyna. Just a day after Berhalter's statement, Danielle revealed herself as the person who told US Soccer about the domestic violence incident. She stated that she brought up Greg's past to sporting director Ernie Stewart because she was frustrated by the comments made about her son after the team's elimination. Not only that though, Claudio Reyna was involved too. ESPN reported that Claudio Reyna had sent multiple messages about his frustrations about Reyna's limited role to Ernie Stewart and general manager Brian McBride during the World Cup, both of which were good friends of his. Now, as I mentioned right at the beginning, there was an investigation done. This was to see whether or not Greg did anything else in his past or was leaving anything out in his story, and also it was to see if there was any evidence of extortion against Greg. So, what was found? First, let's look at the domestic violence incident in 1992. Looking at what Greg Berhalter said in his initial statement and what was said in the interview and the investigation, there's a bit of a difference. From both Rosalind and Greg's interviews, it was said that Rosalind had actually hit Greg in the face first, which then led to Greg pushing her to the ground and kicking at her legs twice. This was when a random bystander, who neither party knew, tackled Greg, and while that happened, Rosalind got back up and left. Regarding the aftermath of the situation, it was basically what Greg said, but in more detail. Greg said he self-reported the incident to his coach, academic counselor, and on his own accord decided to do community service at a women's teenage correctional facility. Rosalind in her interview mentioned how Greg disappeared for the rest of the semester and sought counseling, talked to his parents, and sought self-help. Eventually, they started seeing each other again at the beginning of their sophomore years. She then ended the interview saying nothing like the incident ever happened again with Greg. The investigation also stated that both parties immediately talked with their family members. In the interviews with Greg's mother and Rosalind's sister, both said they have no knowledge of any similar acts of violence before or after the incident. That's really all the information we can rely upon because there was never any police report made. However, both Greg and Rosalind talked to their respective coaches about the altercation the very next day. Now, the Reyna side of the story. We'll have to go all the way back to December 11th when the Reynas initially talked to Ernie Stewart and made this allegation. After hearing the comments Berhalter made about Gio during the leadership conference, the Reyna family called sporting director Ernie Stewart concerning the issue. And around the end of the call was when Danielle brought up Greg's past saying, quote, Greg beat the living shit out of Rosalind in a back alleyway. Beating the shit out of her. That's far more extreme than what we've heard so far. But guess what, guys? In her interview in the investigation, she said she wasn't even there. What the fuck? Even more insane is that she said in the investigation that she didn't know who hit whom. She was simply told there was a fight and that was it. Peak soccer mom behavior. That's all I have to say. I mean, what a shitty person she is for this. It's very obvious that she didn't actually care about the victim Rosalind in this situation at all. She simply just wanted to use a domestic violence incident to her benefit and hers only. And honestly, I feel bad for the berhalters here. The incident happened more than 30 years ago, and assuming that nothing has happened before or after since, Greg and Rosalind, when they first got back together, had to painfully deal with this throughout the early stages of their relationship. And this was in private, and just like the whole Reyna thing, which is a bit ironic, it's now been brought up in its entirety again, and this time, the whole public knows about it. Now, there's been a good amount of people on Twitter, the intellectuals on Twitter, we all know about them, who have basically been trying to use the domestic violence incident as a way to justify Greg Berhalter not getting the head coach job. And listen, I hate Greg Berhalter more than the next guy. I do not want to see Mid manage the national team ever again. But come on, it was 30 years ago, and every interview, including one from Danielle Reyna herself, said that they don't know of any other incidents since. So if you're using this incident from, once again, 30 plus years ago to justify Berhalter not getting the job, you are no different to Danielle Reyna. You are no different to a soccer mom. That is the lowest of the low. But anyways, after all this, Greg Berhalter is still in the running to become head coach of the national team again. And honestly, I don't think it's really gonna happen. At least I hope. We also mentioned that this investigation would go into seeing if there was any blackmail involving the Reynas. There wasn't, but we still got quite a few interesting interactions within this investigation. Claudio Reyna, throughout the years, has had quite a few complaints with US soccer officials. They've been characterized as inappropriate, bullying, and just flat out mean-spirited. There was even one incident where he complained about a female referee, where he sent a message that said, "In all honesty, can we get real and have male refs for a game like this? It's embarrassing, guys. What are we trying to prove?" And these complaints have been happening since 2019. Claudio complained during the U17 World Cup about how Gio wasn't getting enough time and expected his son to be treated better than the other players. And he also whined about the travel arrangements. Man, it's the U17 World Cup. And then we had the incidents during World Cup 2022. In an interview with some anonymous sources, it was said that after the game against Wales, where Gio was left on the bench, Danielle Reyna refused to go on a bus that had the Berhalter family on it. Then apparently the next day, Danielle said, quote, "I can make one phone call and give one interview, and his cool sneakers and bounce passes will be gone." The bounce passes and the cool sneakers, if you don't know, is referring to Greg Berhalter. And I can't lie, that was pretty funny. But here's the issue though, Danielle. You had your interview during the investigation, and you didn't say shit. You f***ing moron! Now, the last thing I want to point out is a text message that Claudio Reyna sent to Ernie Stewart during the World Cup. The message said, "What a complete and utter f***ing joke. Our family is disgusted, in case you are wondering, disgusted at how a coach is allowed to never be challenged and do whatever he wants." And I mean, on the surface, he's right. Berhalter has never been truly challenged despite having numerous underwhelming performances throughout the last 4 years. And mind you, no sign of improvement either. But don't get the wrong idea here. Claudio Reyna couldn't give less of a shit about the national team's successes. He just wants Gio to be the center of attention. Why do I say that? Because he's complained about every single coach and official that hasn't treated his son like a god. And throwback to about 2019, when he was a candidate to become general manager for the USMNT, his first choice for head coach was Greg Berhalter, one of the closest people to him at the time, and I can assure you that wasn't because of his coaching abilities. Which leads me to the core problem at hand, and that's the fact that this federation is plagued with nepotism. As you've seen throughout this video, there are multiple bonds. Family bonds like the Reynas and the Berhalters, and also friendships like the Reynas with Ernie Stewart and Brian McBride. You could also probably talk about how Jay Berhalter, Greg's older brother, being a higher power in the US Soccer Federation when Greg Berhalter was hired. It's all just a mess, and especially with the US soccer culture and how everyone has to be so damn entitled, no shit this was gonna happen. We already have this issue at the roots where soccer moms feel so entitled to feel like their son or their daughter should be playing more than others or should be treated better than others. And it's this entitledness that runs through the roots of our game into the federation itself that will forever keep us in the lanes of mediocrity. Sure, we got fantastic talent, absolutely brilliant talent. But once again, the federation is the one that's behind the hirings here. And if we're just going to keep getting all these mid coaches simply just because they know people in the federation or because of who they are, yeah, I mean, it's hopeless. You know, we already have this problem at hand. We could talk about the youth development and how it's still f***ed. The one story that always comes to mind is Ricardo Pepi and how he'd have to like drive an hour to practice or something along the lines of that. And don't get me wrong, that's a fantastic story of dedication, but people seem to kind of just forget about the part between that, which is why the f did he have to drive an hour every single day? And with this all being said, it still mind boggles me that there are people that actually look at the US Soccer Federation in a good light. They'll see a little bit of progress being done, very minimal progress by the way, and just praise them like nothing. And the funny thing is, you will never see any of this outside the US. Everyone f***ing hates their federation. Why are we different? Why do we always have to be different? The Federation is our enemy. We should be cursing the Federation at any given point. That way, this bullshit nepotism might finally be thrown out the window. Maybe, just maybe. Let me just give you this example. The French national team. You know, the team that reached the final of the World Cup. What do you think the French people think of their federation? They f***ing hate it. There's a bunch of layers to that. We could go over that in another video. But at the end of the day, they f***ing despise the federation. So once again, I am asking the people who actually like this federation, who praise this federation, why? Again, like I said, if we want to see progress in this game, we have to curse the federation at any given point. Any given point. Because what they've done is not enough. It is not enough by a country mile. Okay, let's get back on track now. Let's review the parties at hand here. Greg Berhalter. Unfortunate that he was victim to the soccer mom. But is he still a dipshit for talking about Reyna after everything was resolved in private? Abso-fucking-lutely. The Reynas, excluding Gio. Bitch made. If we want to be a serious footballing country, we need to ban these types of people from ever mentioning the sport in our country again. And then there's Gio, which I feel like has just been thrown into the crossfire at this point. He is the only person, by the way, I think he's like, what, 21 or something like that, who has actually taken responsibility for his actions as of recent. We're not going to count the Berhalter domestic violence incident. And I do feel bad for him, because he's just trying to play, man. He's trying to play in peace. But his parents are f***ing morons. But yeah, that's the video. I hated making this video because I f***ing hate this federation. What do you guys think though? Is the US Soccer Federation f***ed or is it f***ed? Let me know. Of course, a massive shout out to all our patrons, including Janos Balash, Chris Damasceno, Miliway009, Weston Ware, Aldipu, Alex Rod, Ulta, Amin Suamez, Aresan, Carlos Anaya, Daniel Ortiz, Francisco Hernandez, Miguel Munoz, Return Fire, Rory Burns, Saw, The Motor Drive, Tomicus, Trevor Batson, Vanilla Mexican 17, Victor, David Dunn, Dominic Griffin, Emmett Shea, Louis, Joe Paricio, MX Weeb, Patrick Barley, and Unbroken Persona. If you'd like to join the Patreon, there'll be a link down below and up in the annotations. You can follow my Twitter if you want, follow my Instagram if you like, follow my TikTok, trying to get to 20,000 there, and of course, you can follow my semi-active Twitch. But until then, I'll see you guys.